Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies new and old. My name's Dan.
My name's Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, here comes The Judge with Robert Downey Jr. and Robert Duvall. A modern classic of Kid Lit comes to the big screen with Alexander and His Bad Day. Kevin Kline and Maggie Smith star in My Old Lady. And two sketch comedy pros try their hand at drama with the Skeleton Twins. Our home media moment is Tom Hardy in Locke. And our triple feature of older films is Seven Psychopaths, Joe's pick for Old Classic Horror Month, Candyman, and gangster classic Angels with Dirty Faces. In honor of Kristen Wiig and Bill Hader's turns in The Skeleton Twins, we'll look at our top 5 dramatic performances from SNL vets. Got a stacked show this week, so let's get right into it. First is The Judge, and Justin's going to tell us about it.
Hank Palmer, played by Robert Downey Jr., is on a hot streak, until he receives news that his mother, in his Indiana town that he has long left behind him, has passed away. After making the reluctant decision to return home and reconnect with his friends and family, he discovers that his father, the town judge, played by Robert Duvall, is being charged with murder in the second degree, and decides to take his case. The Judge is a movie with a lot of really interesting ideas, but the overall execution is very generic and messy. This is largely because it has an enormously long running time and tries to do way too many things. At times it's trying to be a deep character study, and in others it's also trying to be this really thorough courtroom drama that's interspersed with a whole slew of subplots along the way. Some of which connect and are interesting, many of which are not and just feel unnecessary. It never drags because largely Duvall and Robert Downey Jr.'s performances really do elevate the material. But as a whole, it just is very stop and start. I thought it was at times very melodramatic. There's a lot of interesting things going on in The Judge that I think could have been great, but I wish they had at least trimmed down 40 minutes or so, and I give it a C+.
Well, it is really always a shame when great performers get subpar material to work with, and such is the case with The Judge. Duvall, Downey Jr., and Billy Bob Thornton are almost always engaging, but this movie has way too many issues to be satisfying. For one thing, anything outside the courtroom or police station, with the exception of a few scenes at the Palmer home, can be completely axed out of the movie. They are boring, annoying, and make an already too long movie seem longer. I joked after seeing the film that really it's the adventures of lawyer Tony Stark, and it's not wrong. Downey seems stuck in a rut, and other than Sherlock Holmes, who is kind of cut from the same cloth as Stark anyhow, all of his roles seem to be of this ilk, and he can be so much better. In The Judge, all of the really emotional stuff between Downey and his wife and daughter, or his lost childhood love, do not evoke any of the intended emotions and fall flat. Really, in a nearly 2.5-hour movie, there's roughly close to an hour that's of much worth, and I give it a C-.
Whoa.
Joe?
I'm actually pretty much in agreement with you guys. I think the biggest problem with this movie is that there's just so many subplots that are either underdeveloped or they just don't need to be there. Mm-hmm. Like you've got side characters like, I know that he's got this one brother who's kind of simple-minded. I guess he's supposed to add some comic relief, but he doesn't need to be in the movie. Vera Farmiga's character, the whole subplot with like rekindling this romance and some twists there.
It's nice, but it's completely unnecessary.
Completely unnecessary. It could have gone a different direction, but as you see in the movie, they actually offer a different explanation, and instead of actually following through after that point, they just kind of drop it. So it just makes you feel as like, okay, all the time we spent with this plot was completely meaningless.
Right.
Which is actually how I feel like even the main plot of the movie itself, you can really tell that the writers did not know how they wanted to end the movie. It's like, okay, are we going to have it end this way or this way? No, we'll have it end this way, but we really wanted to have it end this way, so then we'll just end it this way and then this way. Like, they really are like 4 different endings to this movie, all within like 5 minutes. So you can tell that you don't really know what the exact conclusion's supposed to be. It's just not satisfying because really there was just a lot of time wasted. My favorite part of the movie was actually the courtroom aspect, and I understood there had to be some dramatic elements with the family to kind of add the context of the story and build it up with what they're going for, that more personal angle. But once again, most of those plots were either generic cliche or just underdeveloped or unnecessary. The strongest scenes that were the courtroom case or maybe about 20 minutes of this 2.5-hour movie.
That's what I mean. Like it's
it's
so little.
It's just sad, and I mean it's really disappointing. I mean Billy Bob Thornton's great. but he gets almost nothing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really disappointing. I feel like if it had honestly been a tighter movie that just focused on like its one or two of its main plots, it would have been fine. We didn't need like all these 5 subplots that just most of them don't go anywhere. Ultimately, though, I'm right in the middle with you guys. I give it a C. I mean, the performances were good, but beyond that, it was just really a big mess, very unbalanced.
As far as I'm concerned, he could have been a single child. Like, not only did they not need the mentally handicapped brother, they didn't need really the other brother either.
I mean,
like, yeah, they discuss a couple of plots with him with, he could have been a great baseball player, but you had a car accident when you guys were teenagers and you ruined his arm. And it's like,
I mean, to be fair, they try to use that to actually show that Duvall's character, the judge, has another reason for kind of having a grudge against his son. But you could have easily spun that another way. He could have just been a rotten kid, and he was just hard on him. Like, they're adding more melodrama when there doesn't need to be any.
Yeah.
And once again, it would have been fine, but D'Onofrio's character is barely there anyway.
Yeah.
And doesn't express much emotion. He really almost says nothing. Like, maybe he's hurt by it, maybe he doesn't care. I don't know.
Who's to say?
I don't know. He's just like, there's literally a scene where he's watching them as they're arguing, like, got anything to contribute? One way or the other. Nothing? Okay, we'll just write you out completely.
Clearly, there's some hostility, but it's not being explored. It needs to flow naturally, and they don't know how to tap into that
because there's too much going on. For instance, his daughter. He's got this whole divorce storyline going on, which is also basically
I hated it so much.
Basically ignored.
Yeah.
Like, his daughter was really cute, and I liked those scenes, but once again, didn't need to be in that movie.
No, not at all.
Completely.
And I never thought I would see a movie where every time Vera Farmiga comes on the screen, I just, like, groaned. It was... her character was so useless. They didn't do anything with her. I love her as an actress. We've talked about a lot of her movies so far on the show. But just by the last, like, hour of the movie, whenever she appeared in the scene, I'm like, all right, I'm not interested right now. I'm
honestly
bored.
She's just a name, really.
Yeah.
Another name to add on to this cast.
Mm-hmm. And it is an impressive cast.
Yeah.
But you gotta also give them something to do.
Well, they kind of did. An unnecessary plot that just took up too much time.
Dak Shepard, he was fine. But, I mean...
But even he had nothing to do with
I know, that's what I mean. Like, the first scene where Duvall goes to him, because he doesn't want Robert Downey Jr., his son, to represent him. He goes to the Indiana lawyer. Oh, I want somebody from the small town. That scene could have just been the only scene. And then, okay, I realize he's an idiot now. Son, I go with you.
Let's
but
segue,
no, they had
man.
to shoehorn him in the rest of the movie.
And literally, I mean, I guess he's working with him on the case, but we never see him do anything.
No.
It's almost like he's there.
Vomit.
Basically.
That's all we see him do the whole movie.
It's like he's technically there to represent him, maybe because they can't officially have his son represent him, but then again, he does all the cross-examination anyway, so... What
would be the point?
I mean, I guess we can assume there are some scenes in the trial where he does do some cross-examination or maybe some investigative stuff on the side.
Right.
Because usually there's a team of 2 or 3 lawyers anyway. Mm-hmm. But he could have... I like that character, too. Like, I wish they would have done a little more with him. Like,
instead of making him a giant oaf.
Because you could tell that he was invested. He wanted to be a good lawyer, and I felt like maybe by the end he would have learned how to be a better lawyer.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just... Yeah. Just another shame.
A lot of wasted opportunities in this movie. All right, well, let's move on here to Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. This is based on a classic children's book, and in it, middle child Alexander, played delightfully by Ed Oxenbould, has had a run of bad luck, but is surrounded by a family blessed by good fortune. So at midnight on his 12th birthday, he wishes that his family would know what it's like to have a horrible day. Fate allows this, and his parents, played by Steve Carell and Jennifer Garner, and older brother and sister, all have the worst days of their lives, while Alexander's life is starting to look up. It's always hard to translate a very short book into a feature-length film. Sometimes you get a great surprise, like Where the Wild Things Are. Sometimes you get Mike Myers in The Cat in the Hat. Alexander has its issues, for sure, notably that just about nothing in this movie is very realistic, and that not all of the day's incidents work with the comedy. But it's hard to deny that this crew really does behave like a family. Carell is hilarious, even with some so-so material. Oxenbould may not be as natural as some first-time screen kids, but he's got a charm that really does brighten the film. And I really appreciated the timeless nature of the script. There are very few pop culture cues that seem to be the norm for films like this. meaning that hopefully, like the book itself, Alexander the film might be enjoyed by the next couple of generations as well. It doesn't always work, but when it does, it's a solid film that can be enjoyed by all ages, and I give it a B. Joe?
Well, I'm mostly on board with you here, I guess. I thought it was fairly enjoyable. The comedy doesn't always work, but there are some scenes that do, and I do agree with you. I think the best thing about it is how believable the family is. Like, I could see all these situations, all the bickering, for the most part, flowed very natural. I did like how things just kind of, like, erupted out of control. The main character, like, he was cute. I guess he did have a charm to him. Like, he was likable. But I can't say that his performance was the best.
Yeah, he's not an amazing actor.
I mean, like,
that's very true.
I thought it was distracting a bit, but I thought everybody else was good. Actually, I have to say, Jennifer Garner usually is kind of the sweet type, so it was kind of cool to see her flip out.
Yeah, she was actually pretty funny in this.
I actually really liked her in that. It was just kind of her playing against type a little bit, and Steve Carell was awesome. I kind of wish that everybody in the movie had, like, a better developed arc. Like, the strongest was actually probably his brother.
I would say,
he was probably the best written character in the whole movie. I liked his journey overall the best. Everything else was okay. I thought it was mostly fairly predictable, but it's well done enough that I think the family can enjoy it, and it's relatively harmless. I'm going to give it a little lower than you. I'll give it a B-.
Okay. Justin, what'd you think?
As my co-hosts know, my enormous dislike for Alexander's marketing this year has made it one of my least anticipated to review on the show. I try to avoid bias, which is why I only base my own personal enjoyment as 10% of my grading criteria, but this movie essentially acts as a textbook example in regards to why I loathe the majority of contemporary family films. Just about every character is one-dimensional and weak, no thanks to the incredibly uncharismatic performance by Oxenbould. The narrative progression mostly consists of bumbling from one idiotic circumstance to the next with minimal coherence, and the humor mostly relies on disgusting potty humor that arguably pushes the boundaries of a PG rating. This wouldn't be so much of an issue if it weren't blatantly ripping off movies that did all of this significantly better. Liar, Liar, and Diary of a Wimpy Kid come to mind. So is this another addition to Justin's ever-expanding pile of failed movies in 2014? Believe it or not, given what our listeners have heard thus far, it isn't. Granted, I was never as enchanted by the film as the theater full of youngsters and their parents that I saw it with. I do have to admit that some of the slapstick is slightly amusing. Alongside that, the message of taking the good with the bad is an important one for kids, and while I wish that they had hit it home better, they did honestly mean well with what they considered family fun. For these reasons, I can't in good conscience fail Alexander, and instead I'll just leave it with a D-.
But you know, Justin, I think you hit on it yourself. You were in a theater full of people enjoying this film, which is why I don't know that the personal bias is a 10%. I mean, it seems like you were in a theater full of people that were laughing and having a good time with the movie. You know, you weren't, obviously, and that's, you know, that is what it is.
Which my counter will always be, I was also in a theater of people who were crying when Clint Eastwood sang, "You Are My Sunshine in Trouble with the Curve." It doesn't mean that it's not a terrible movie.
Yes, but you gave Trouble with the Curve a much higher grade than a D-.
Trouble with the Curve was at least structurally coherent in comparison to this nonsense.
What was structurally incoherent about it?
Narrative progression is a complete mess. Nothing is believable whatsoever. I'll give you the family dynamic kind of, but given that the family is so one-dimensional, cartoonish, and just bizarre at points, it just feels clunky and awkward. I'm sure for anyone under the age of 6, it's hilarious, but anyone older than that, it's a complete and utter nightmare.
I couldn't agree less with that. I mean, I was in a theater where I probably heard the parents laughing even more than the kids. Maybe because they, you know, have kids of their own and they see the chaotic nature on screen. They can relate a little bit to the stressed out parents, whatever. But to say this is for age 6 and under, I think that's a little ridiculous.
I think it's a film that's rooted in nonsense, so a nonsensical plot with cartoony characters doesn't exactly jive against the tone of the movie.
I'm okay with nonsense. I'm not okay with the fact that they're basically so poorly strung together that it's like watching a bad SNL sketch on crack.
But it's structured in vignettes. We spend time with each of the person's day.
Yeah.
We do. However, they're not structured well. They are horribly written. They're disgustingly unfunny. I know you don't agree with me on that, but I thought it was incredibly inappropriate for a family film.
Well, some scenes were probably a little bit. Like the scene at the end with the cowboys, I thought was pushing it a little bit.
Maybe a little bit, but I mean, it was stopped before anything actually happened.
Still, I mean, I guess it's more for parents. Like, keep it PG was kind of a joke, you know.
I mean, I would say the scene where Jennifer Garner said penis a few times is probably as risque as it got.
But I mean,
Not
penis
the
isn't
urination and dump.
baby's poop.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Little kids probably understand that.
I mean, listen, you know, not to give spoilers, but we're discussing a movie on the show next week, which is rated PG and animated, in which a kitty cat poops different letters of the alphabet. I mean, is that more or less disgusting than that? I would say more.
I thought that was pretty gross, actually.
Yeah, I would say much more than anything in this movie.
For some reason, MPA seems to think that animation means you can get away with more.
Hence, killing people horribly in animation is so much different, unless the same.
That's not something I agree with. But they haven't made it the crux of the entire movie, which is
not gross out humor is not the crux of this movie.
I'm sorry, every third joke is basically a play to pathetic potty humor.
I don't agree with that. I mean, there's jokes about the kid eating the marker. Granted, Jennifer Garner's storyline does have a lot of literal potty humor.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you know, all of Steve Carell's stuff, you know, his arms catch on fire. I mean...
Which is another big thing. You mentioned that it's not dated. That entire thing is a textbook example of them trying to be hip, and it just misses the mark completely.
What's trying to be so hip about it?
It's quite possibly the worst interpretation of the video game industry since Let's Be Cops. I would honestly...
that was only a month ago, so
I would argue even worse, actually.
I was thinking about that when I saw it. I don't think it's... I mean, once again, obviously the writers of the movie don't know much about it, but...
About anything. It's horrible.
But... I don't think it's as bad as Let's Be Cops video game interpretation.
No.
They don't understand how video games work. They don't understand how books work. It's
a comedy.
One of the things I said in my review is that not a whole lot of things in this movie are realistic. Yeah. That's sort of the basis of the film. I mean, he makes a wish.
He does, which is, like I said, also ripping off Liar Liar, which did it 8 times better.
I don't think it's really going to stand the test of time or anything, but I don't think it's god-awful. I mean, it's, you know,
I think it's quite harmless.
I think harmless,
so, to be completely honest.
But it's a complete waste of everybody's time as far as I'm concerned.
Maybe.
I couldn't agree less. All right, up next is My Old Lady, and Joe's going to have that one.
My Old Lady is a British-American drama/comedy film written by Israel Horovitz in the director's first feature-length film. It stars Maggie Smith, Kevin Kline, and Kristen Scott Thomas, who we remember from... Anybody? We liked her character in...
One of the Bourne movies?
She was the person we wanted Hugh Grant to get with in 4 Weddings and a Funeral.
Oh, yes, she was. A much younger Kristen Scott Thomas.
She looks about the same.
She does look exactly the same, you're right.
Anyway, Kline plays Matthias, a middle-aged New York native who's down on his luck. Matthias travels to Paris in an attempt to sell a house he's inherited from his estranged deceased father. He finds there an old woman named Mathilde, who resides there. He is shocked to find that the apartment is part of the viager, a system of renting apartments. Therefore, he will not actually be able to obtain the apartment until she dies. Even worse, he actually needs to pay her a fee to stay there. The film follows Matthias as he attempts to find a way to sell the apartment. He has a rocky relationship with Mathilde's daughter, Chloe, played by Thomas, and eventually discovers a secret as to why his father gave the apartment to her in the first place. This movie seemed to be marketed as a romantic comedy, but it's more of a serious drama than anything else. There is a lot going on, and though it does seem to have some pacing issues in the beginning, the characters do provide some intrigue, and the mystery does lead to some compelling drama for the most part. The cast is good, but unfortunately, the script doesn't delve quite far enough into the matter to provide a major punch, and it does wrap up perhaps a little too neatly. This isn't to say the film fails completely at tackling its subject matter, it just seems to ultimately play to either too safe or just delve into some questionable melodrama. Still, overall, it's a satisfactory watch, and I give it a B.
Well, yeah, much like The Judge, which we just talked about, the casting choices here are great. Kline, Smith, and Thomas all working well together and playing off each other. And while this movie as a whole is much more tolerable than The Judge, it does still have some glaring issues. For one thing, the sweeping shifts from broad comedy to the drama of suicide, adultery, and alcoholism rarely work, and thus the movie is neither that funny or that emotional. I would say the most interesting character is Maggie Smith's Madame Gerard, but the film really wants you to get behind Jim, and most of the time I didn't feel like he deserved our sympathy. What holds the film together, though, as I mentioned, is the wonderful cast, and because of that, it's at least never dull. Older viewers, I think, will find more to enjoy here than young ones, but for me it gets a B-, just a little bit lower than Joe. Justin?
It's interesting seeing how an adaptation of a stage production translates to screen because in some instances, it transcends the medium, as evident in August Osage County, whereas in others it feels like the film production of the show itself. Jersey Boys. My Old Lady is somewhere between the two extremes, with Kline, Smith, and Thomas certainly keeping the film lively with their performances, but also feeling somewhat stagey. Although I certainly applaud Kline's passionate monologues, the fact that most of them are done while he's drunk and clearly trying to emulate this grandiose vocal nature of his tone of voice definitely undermines his dramatic intent.
To be fair, that is kind of a staple of his general performances.
Yeah. The twists of the narrative are interesting as well as the payoff, but similar to last week's Angels Over Broadway, it seems to end on a solid note and then dive straight into generic cliche. My Old Lady's definitely worth watching on performances alone, but only has a few issues that keep it from being a better film, and like Joe, I also give it a B.
Yeah, the scenery's great. They're in France,
Classic, French music.
yeah, the music was spot on with what was going on.
But I have to say, I like the story. Like, the story,
yes.
The basic story itself
is pretty interesting.
Provides some pretty interesting ideas for character exploration and tackles some really tough subject matter. Mm-hmm. The problem is, it's just... Maybe it is the tonal shift. It just doesn't feel quite balanced in that area, and it plays it too safe. A little bit, yeah. It teases you with, like, okay, are we going to push this further? And I just feel like they kind of copped out with that ending a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, everything's just kind of, a little too...
Well, it's wrapped up so neatly.
Like,
it's a little too neat.
Like, I like the way they tried to resolve it. Like, it's basically, the whole movie is about basically moving on from the past and making a good situation out of something bad.
Right.
I'm fine with that. But everybody seems, like, completely hunky-dory. Mm-hmm. And everything's wrapped up. Just, like, considering how realistic the film was for the most part, I thought the ending was a little too cliche.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. How did you guys feel about the Jim character? I mean... The movie really, really, I thought, wanted you to relate to him and feel bad for him, and I wasn't quite there.
I'll answer this first. I hated him at first. I thought he was kind of insufferable. Mm-hmm. Kline makes him more enjoyable, but the character himself I didn't like that much. But as you learn more about the situation, I was more on his side as it went along.
Okay.
I thought it did become more understandable. I don't know if he was the greatest guy, but you could at least understand him as more is revealed.
I'm definitely with you on the insufferable part, Joe. For me, it was more or less of I wanted to get behind him, but every time I was getting closer to liking him, we had these well-acted monologues, but the fact that he's, like, completely drunk while doing it and makes him even more obnoxious. It's like 2 steps forward, 10 steps back.
Yeah, I had started to, like, gain a little sympathy for him, and then when he fell off the wagon, it was just like...
Why should I feel bad for you?
Right. You have obviously created all these problems yourself. Maggie Smith called you out on that within seconds of meeting you.
Yeah.
It was just hard for me to get behind him, and I felt like the film really wanted me to.
Well, I think the film wanted to explain, like, the situation that happened actually was a big part of why he ended up that way. Like, we learned something crucial, which I think is understandable.
You're right.
So, like, by the end, I think you have to be a little on his side because there's something that happens, like, okay... There's some reasons he's got some issues with depression.
Right.
So, like, throughout most of it, it's a bit rough. He seems immature, just kind of a loser, needs to grow up. But, like I said, there's enough there that you can kind of understand, I think.
Yeah. I guess I'm not sure if the payoff was worth the wait.
Maybe not. I don't know. I think it was a good twist, but I don't know. There were some things that, like I said, that were wrapped up a little too neatly, I think.
All right, well, let's move on to The Skeleton Twins. Recent Saturday Night Live cast members Kristen Wiig and Bill Hader star as twins Maggie and Milo in this drama. The two have not spoken in 10 years, but Milo's suicide attempt at the beginning of the film, and at the same time that Maggie is considering taking her own life, prompts her and her husband Lance, played by Luke Wilson, to take Milo in until he can get his act together. It is a feat when two people who are really only known for their comedy chops can turn expectations on their head and deliver knockout dramatic performances. Even the nervous jokes that Hader makes as Milo rarely come off as funny, more as sad grasps at normalcy after trying to end his life days earlier. I think it takes two actors that trust each other to pull this off, and obviously after years of doing sketch comedy together, these two have that in spades. Even Ty Burrell, known for pratfalls and over-the-top deliveries on Modern Family, turns in a shockingly good turn as Rich, one of Milo's former teachers that seduced him at age 15. That's not to say this film is a hard watch. It certainly has fun with itself when it needs to, most of all in a very memorable lip-syncing scene, but it keeps it all very real, and there aren't a lot of heavy laughs, or really even laughs, period. But the worst I can say about the film is that it's hardly covering original ground or has that much new to say, but it's great to see actors that I already love spreading their wings, and I give the Skeleton Twins an A-. Joe?
Well, I actually would mostly agree with you there. I think that I'm fairly unfamiliar with the main character.
Bill Hader.
Bill Hader's character. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything else. Is he SNL
yeah,
primarily?
as not a Saturday Night Live watcher, the only thing you would really know him from is as Flint Lockwood from the Cloudy movies.
Because I recognized his voice, but I don't think I'd ever seen him in anything. I liked his character. I think that everybody was fairly believable. Also tackled some pretty heavy subject matter. For the most part, I thought it flowed pretty well. I thought there were some scenes that might have been a little melodramatic, perhaps. I don't think it delved into anything too original, but I can't really say it was poorly made. The only real negative that stuck out to me is that I honestly did not like the ending. And I will admit, it's because I understand that it's focusing on situations that are not easily resolved. These are very complicated people. I thought their stories were good. I felt like they needed to kind of have a conclusion one way or the other. That you'll notice this is a theme in later movies we're going to be talking about. But I will admit, I really liked Luke Evans' character. I thought he was the best character in the movie.
Yeah, Luke Wilson was really good in this movie.
He was a really
surprisingly
really nice guy. Really just in terms of morality, positivity, just a really good character to kind of balance off a lot of the depressing stuff. And
not hokey.
Not hokey. No, I could see it. He's a good guy.
Right.
He's tolerant. He's, I guess, maybe simple-minded, but maybe not as simple-minded as we think. He just, for whatever reason,
I can see that.
Maybe he's had issues of his own. I wish we'd delve more into him because he was a good balance for the two siblings, and I just liked that about him. And I mean, I just feel like he got so screwed over, and I just
he does.
And I just and the thing is, they don't even follow through completely with that to tell you what happened.
Right.
And I just didn't like that. I did not like that at all. And I think that's one reason it did pitch my bias a little bit.
Okay.
They should have followed through a little bit with that.
So you wanted to see maybe a little bit more of an epilogue.
Maybe something. Even if they said, okay, it worked out, it didn't work out, these are the steps we're going to take. Even just a hint. I'm not saying they have to tell me everything. Okay. But literally they just say, we're messed up. But we have each other, which is great. But don't completely mess him up,
It's a fair criticism.
Had it been for that, I would have given it a little higher. Still, very well done movie. Flows well narratively. Has some really funny scenes to uplift some of the dramatic elements, but very believable. And good performances from both of them. Probably my favorite Kirsten Wiig performance. Yeah. I'm not as familiar with her. I still have yet to see Bridesmaids, but I did really like her in this, and I give it a B+.
All right. Justin?
A major component I love about the cinematic experience is when a movie manages to completely throw one's expectations in a different direction and be all the better for it. Given that this starred Hader and Wiig, I had expected this to be more comedic, and I was mistaken. But I was also very pleasantly surprised. To start, The Skeleton Twins is dark. Not the darkest thing we've seen all year, hard to top Calvary there.
Yeah.
But certainly leaves...
That's true.
But certainly leaves an unsettling feeling resonating with the viewer moments from the start of the film. However, it's that same level of darkness that makes The Skeleton Twins such a strong movie. How these two characters deal with their situations. Although it doesn't always manage to draw one in during the earlier moments, the interplay between Hader and Wiig feels 100% authentic. They're both hurting in different ways, and it's heartbreaking in regards to how it pushes them to the limits of their sanity. Yet the two still keep a subtle, hopeful influence on each other in ways that's both bizarre and ridiculous, but all the more touching. The only other regret I have about this film stems from, much like Joe, the ending. I applaud the emotional component of it, but once that segment's over, the film ends shortly thereafter. It's not a bad ending, it just feels rushed, which pulls down what could have easily been an A-, much like you, Dan, to a B+.
Yeah, I can't say that you guys are wrong in the unresolved nature of the ending. I guess it didn't strike me quite as harshly as it did you, but I definitely see what you guys are saying about that. Because it does feel like it just ends, and then there we are, and it's very open-ended.
I can understand that. I just personally didn't like it.
Right.
I admit, like the Luke Wilson character, particularly for me, I just wanted something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't even have to be like a gigantic whole extra 30 minutes. I mean,
2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Yeah, like a 2-minute epilogue would have definitely worked.
Like, hey, this is where we are now.
This is where we're going to be.
How you doing?
Yeah.
Good. Mm-hmm. Hey, we're hanging in there, and make a little joke, and that's it. Like, something, just
right.
A little more hopeful,
No, I can definitely see it. I guess for me, I'm a little more familiar with both of these actors, than you guys are. Justin, I know you've seen probably a little more Kristen Wiig stuff than Joe has. But, I mean, for me, this was, watching 5-6 years worth of them just doing funny bits and characters and voices on SNL, maybe even a TV spot here or there, and the occasional movie appearance. And then this just really floored me. And even the marketing, our theme of the year here, the couple of trailers I saw for this, if I'm remembering them correctly, sort of, I mean, they played up the lip sync scene in the trailer, and they played up a couple of his jokes, and the scene where they went out, with him dressed up as the woman. It was obviously going for the SNL crowd saying, "Hey, here's your favorites," with very little
of that
mention of the suicide attempts and the
multiple suicide attempts.
And I got the sense while watching the trailer that it was definitely like a dramatic comedy or a comedic drama, maybe, but not. I mean, this is pretty much a straight ahead drama
for the most part, yeah.
And I think that was very surprising. I don't know if people will find that a pleasant surprise if they're big fans of these people and go see the movie. I would hope they do.
I would wager that if I had seen the preview, I probably would have disliked being misled again. Mm-hmm. I had the benefit of having no idea what this movie is about, which I think amplified my experience.
Which always seems to work well for me,
Well, I don't know what... I
like not knowing anything about a movie going into it.
I think that's good. Mm-hmm. It depends, I guess.
Like, I think if you showed it as it is, most people wouldn't come because they're so used to the idea of Wiig and Hader as these comedic personalities from SNL.
Right. But, here it played at Sundance and it won the dramatic prize. So it's like that speaks clearly that this is
It's a hint.
It's a heavy film, and Justin said it. I mean, it's very dark in places.
Yeah.
But also a little bit lighter, but more in a familiar way rather than a laugh out loud kind of a way. All right, well, let's move into our home media moment. And before we do, I'll remind you that our top 5 coming up will include us talking all about our favorite Saturday Night Live comedians turned drama with these dramatic performances. But our home media moment this week is Locke. And Joe's got that.
Sorry to disappoint you all. It's actually not a follow-up to Lost. That's not a prequel.
I wish it was.
I feel like that would sell, I'm sure. Maybe like 10 years in the future somehow, but whatever.
When he had use of his legs. Well, we don't know.
We don't know. Well, no, he got into the car at the beginning.
That's true.
So he did have loose legs
at the beginning.
Anyway, Locke is a 2013 British drama directed by Stephen Wright and starring Tom Hardy along with a supporting voice cast. The film takes place in a single location of a moving car as Ivan Locke, played by Hardy, heads down to comfort a woman who's giving birth to his baby. Turns out this woman is someone he had a brief affair with. Feeling responsible for the mess, Locke puts everything on the line to go see her. This includes putting off watching a soccer game with his family and leaving a major construction job in the hands of a very nervous second-in-command. On his journey, we see Locke as a man whose life is dictated by rigid discipline and planning. He has a variety of exchanges over the phone, trying to comfort the soon-to-be mother, keeping his marriage from falling apart, and guiding his subordinates to make sure the major project goes through. There are 2 things about this movie that make it very impressive. First is the crisp editing, cinematography, and soundtrack to keep this fairly limited location interesting. Second is the excellent performance by Hardy, as he manages to convey a great deal about the complicated individual who is so multifaceted. The story is actually rather straightforward and is so strong due to the uninhibited realism of the emotions of the characters. Sometimes the film seems to lack confidence in these strengths, though, hinting that Locke is haunted by memories of a dead father. Not so subtly. The script reminds of this perhaps one or two times too many, and sad to say, the dialogue does make use of some rather unsubtle imagery, symbolically, such as a man's involvement in the concrete industry and his need to be like a solid foundation. I think the metaphor does work, but the script once again may lack some confidence as it's repeated over and over again. With the exception of a few minor issues like this, I have to confess the ending could have provided perhaps a hint of closure, leaving this viewer slightly underwhelmed. Still, Hardy is a great talent here, and the cast and crew obviously put a great deal of emotion into a mostly tight script, and I give it an A-.
Justin?
Although this year has left much to be desired, there has been many a strong acting performance to celebrate. I loved Ralph Fiennes in The Grand Budapest Hotel. We raved about Brendan Gleeson in Calvary, but for me it was Tom Hardy's performance as the titular Locke who completely blew me away. Locke is a film about choice, and the struggle to make one that could potentially ruin the lives of others. It's not the first film that we've talked about at length in regards to this matter in Season 2. Mr. Nobody comes to mind. But it's far and away the best of the bunch. If nothing else, a massive amount of respect has to be given to Hardy for playing Locke with such intense realism and yet accomplishing this from the confines of his car for the bulk of the film. He's torn between the two extremes, knowing both are going to hurt him in some vicinity, and this comes out slowly in the most subtle ways that almost suggest fourth wall breaking. Admittedly, the first time this occurs, it's a bit strange, but by the end, it ultimately allows the audience to see how beautifully written this film is and why Locke makes his final decision. Locke is a fantastic film that I truly hope gets recognized at the next Oscars, and I give it an A+.
Wow. I had a bit of a different take on it than that. I've always said that to pull off a role where the actor is literally the only person on screen the entire film, he or she has to be a great performer and then also be given a great, compelling script. As I mentioned on a recent show when we talked about The Drop, Tom Hardy is one of my absolute favorite up-and-comers, and he pulls this role off masterfully. It's the second part of my premise, the great, compelling script, in which Locke suffers a bit. Played out in near real time, Locke's themes are handled okay, but the film shows its full hand too soon. If it had kept us hanging on a little bit longer why Ivan Locke is doing what he's doing, or even what he's doing, it may have had more resonance with me. I'm also not sure the monologuing with his deceased father worked all the time. Joe mentioned it kept coming up again and again as well, maybe too many times. But still, it is shot, edited, and acted incredibly well. For me, it's a B. I do think that, if Tom Hardy gets an acting nod for this, that's awesome. I think the editing definitely could
Great.
Could get some award love.
I have to say, though, my favorite performance this year was actually from The Drop.
Yeah, I actually thought he was a little bit... Well, I think he was given more to do in The Drop.
Well, to be fair, I guess there was more time for that movie.
I was going to say, I'm not sure that's entirely fair, but...
Well, the character is, because he's certainly on screen more in Locke. He's the entire movie.
Yes. However, the
character was better written?
Character's better written, but I would argue it's apples and oranges.
Yeah, I suppose, but a performance is still a performance, and I liked the character and the performance better in The Drop. Though this was a very good one. It's right up there. Internally, perhaps there was more, but...
I was going to say, I would argue the latter, actually.
There's less going on?
No, I would argue that there's more going on internally-wise with Locke.
You could argue that. There's a lot going on in The Drop's character, too, but my point is that... I really like the character of Locke, and he's very conflicted, but quite frankly, the movie ended too soon. It could have had another 5 minutes. I once again did not like that ending at all. I hated that ending.
I think he was left with a choice, and he made the one he wanted to make. Did it have repercussions? Yes.
I don't know if it did.
I think so.
Maybe. We don't know. We don't know.
We hear about it. We obviously know he's making a certain choice and choosing the next direction of his life. Yeah. Where that heads and what are the consequences of that, we don't know. Do we need to? I don't think so.
Maybe not, but I don't know.
We still see that he made a choice. So I think that leads to at least some degree of closure.
All I wanted, I know it might seem kind of superfluous, but I liked how structurally speaking, at the beginning of the movie, we see him at his job, leaving his old life, entering the car. The whole movie is his car, but we know that the car is just a way to get him from one point of his life to another. We never see him literally get to that point. It would have been nice if he arrived at the hospital and got out of the car, end scene. I know it's small, but I don't even know if he even went to the hospital, because he just kind of drives off. So I think the choice is a little more ambiguous than you might think.
It is ambiguous, I'll grant you that, but we at least, like I said, see that he made a choice. Is he heading there? We don't know. But he's heading in a different direction, which is the general overlying theme of the film.
My point was that, yes, maybe we don't need to see exactly, what happens at that end. Maybe it doesn't matter. But what I don't necessarily agree with Justin is that he's more internally complex in this movie than in The Drop. As I said in my review, I think he lays everything on the table pretty quickly in this movie, and the monologuing tells us exactly what he's thinking internally. So I don't know that he's that inwardly complex, at least that we don't get to see. I mean, yes, maybe his wife and everybody else in his life, they don't get to see the monologuing part, so maybe they don't know what he's thinking. But I think we have a pretty clear concept of what he's thinking, and I would have liked to see more restraint on the part of the director and the writer in that regard.
Yes, he is putting it all on the table. However, we hear very early on he sets the general clock of where he needs to be. If it's longer than that, it doesn't make sense. Therefore, we're hearing about him in, like you mentioned, real time.
Right.
We don't really need all this outside exposition. Obviously, somebody's going to get hurt over whatever decision he chooses to make. Goes one place, X person gets hurt. Goes to the other place, Y person gets hurt.
Of course.
Doesn't do either, both get hurt. Probably Locke too.
But the thing about him, though, is that he's so... he has this whole philosophy that he can make everything work down to a formula. That's why he's trying so hard. He's saying, I'll deal with this.
Which is why his character is so good. In contrast to The Drop, yes, he's a generally well-written character, albeit in that one I would say, if you want to talk showing their hand.
I get you. If you're talking about the screenplay revealing too many things, I understand that. But in terms of the character, in comparison between the two, would you say they lay everything about him immediately? I don't think so. There's a lot going on with that character too.
I agree.
I don't think there's this huge gap between them.
I would say both are basically structured as need-to-know basis. I mean, with Locke, things are moving faster, so more details have to happen quicker and more naturally.
Right. Look, my only issue with that, in terms of Locke's character, is that I didn't, and I think Dan's trying to say this perhaps a little more, is that not everything had to be literally stated.
Yeah.
Keep a little mystery, I think
that's... But at the same time, the entire way this is being divulged is through conversation, through communication.
But it doesn't have to always be communication. Between all the individuals, yes.
But I still think there's some degree of subtext in this film.
Yeah, there is a lot. I agree with you. But and the strength of the film is actually between all these conversations. That's how we learn things. I don't mind him talking to himself or his dad, but I wouldn't have minded a couple scenes where we literally just see him expressing some emotion without literally saying, this is why I'm doing this, this is why I'm doing this. Have a little more confidence in your audience.
But like you said it yourself, Joe, he's an incredibly structured character. It wouldn't make sense if he just stopped for a second and let the emotions do the talking. He's methodical. He's planning in his head, talking out loud, thinking out loud. So it's...
All right, well, Dan, I'm curious. You obviously had a significantly bigger difference in your grade. What was it about the story you didn't think jived quite as well? You said the plot didn't work for you quite as well.
Well, I liked the general story.
Yeah.
I just think that the movie shows its hand far too soon. I think a little bit of mystery on where he's going and what he's doing, I think could have went a long way.
I could agree with that.
Talk more with your wife and your son and your job before you talk to the other event. And I think it's, and I get, it's not a mystery movie, but I mean, I think it would have been a little bit more fulfilling if, you're like, okay, well, why is he being so mysterious? You're in the same boat at that point as his boss or his wife. All he's saying to his boss is, I have somewhere I need to be. All he's saying to his wife is, I have to be on the job. So I would have liked to have gone on a little bit longer not knowing where he was driving. That's all.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad way to go.
Like I said, I don't think that would be true to his character.
he can only
He doesn't really seem to
respond to when the phone rings. I mean, I'm just saying they could have written in that portion of it. He could still be monologuing and saying, I don't know what to do, Dad, guide me, whatever, without actually revealing where he's going. They could have done that for a little bit longer, and that would still be true to his character. He's still talking out loud. He's still doing his bit. I don't think either method is necessarily wrong. For me personally, I would have liked to have gone a little bit longer wondering. All right, well, let's move very quickly into our Green Hornet serial. We've done now 3 serialized movies on the show. We watched them before each Oscar night, and this one was the Green Hornet, so we're going to chat briefly about that. Justin?
Britt Reed, played by Gordon Jones, leads a life of fighting injustice on both sides of the law. He uses his newspaper to expose rackets, but also uses his alter ego, the Green Hornet, and his sidekick, Kato, played by Kay Luke, to track the criminals down while shaping the pair as villains themselves. Though when the Green Hornet and Kato come into conflict with a criminal mastermind known only as, and this is pretty blunt, the leader, it's up to the Green Hornet to bring them to justice and save the day. Out of all the serials we've watched, the Green Hornet stands as the best one yet. I admired Dick Tracy's more grounded detective story, but the slow start made the payoff a struggle. And while the Superman serial is considered a classic, the repeated use of archive footage near the end ruined the finale. In the Green Hornet, we get the best elements of all of these, kicking off the action and exciting premise right from the very beginning. I confess that not every episode's a keeper, and it can be debated whether or not it loses steam near the end, but there was never a cliffhanger where I wasn't wondering over the course of the week how our hero would escape his fate. Alongside that, it's easy to see where other popular ideas may have been inspired about the serial, such as a certain exposition-driven title sequence from an iconic sci-fi franchise. It may not be the perfect serial, but it's definitely contributed to my love of serials as well as major excitement for whichever one we choose to explore next, and I give it an A-.
Joe, what do you think of the Green Hornet?
I actually agree with Justin. I think it's the best one we watched so far. I do think that Superman definitely was more entertaining early on, but it kind of had some pacing issues towards the end, and that finale was just rushed and stupid. At least the Green Hornet didn't have that. For the most part, it was pretty coherent. Dick Tracy, I think, had a lot of those great detective elements that I saw a lot in Green Hornet, but they kind of balanced out with the fun of Superman. So I think we kind of got the best of both worlds here. Really, it was enjoyable. I was pretty invested with most of the episodes, and I would actually give it an A- as well.
I'm just under you guys. I think the Superman one was probably my favorite. Dick Tracy was okay, as we talked about a few months ago, but nothing really, amazing. This one, for me, is not quite on the same level of that Superman. I do agree that each chapter finale was probably the best of the ones we've watched so far. It was, very exciting. It ended on an exciting note. The finale certainly is better than Superman. I didn't hate the Superman one, but it was very rushed and kind of stupid, really.
Yeah.
In a word. But, here, I guess, with Superman and Dick Tracy, our heroes were the title characters. And here, Kato really shines a lot more than the Green Hornet.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a huge detractor for me, but I just, call it the Green Hornet and Kato then, at least.
Yeah.
Because he really is the standout.
To be fair, though, that's kind of a long-running joke with the Green Hornet.
Which you mentioned, and I guess this is where it probably started.
I guess, probably.
When it comes down to it. So for me, it's a B+. I think I gave the Superman one an A-. But definitely still in that range. I am very excited to see where we're going next. I think we sort of talked about Batman a little bit, so that may be the next one. But yeah, enjoyable, I would say, for sure. All right, well, we're going to move into our top 5 now, and this is the dramatic performances from Saturday Night Live alum. I'll start this one off. I do have an honorable mention, and that is Will Forte in Nebraska. I chose mostly people that are the stars of their respective films for this list, and Will Forte has a more supporting role, but nonetheless very dramatic and a great movie just in general. My number 5 is Molly Shannon in Year of the Dog. This is a really heartbreaking role. It's sort of in line with the Skeleton Twins character. She is a very, very depressed woman, a quote-unquote loser. She doesn't have a lot of friends. Her family finds her annoying. It's sort of a workplace drama and a family drama. My number 4 is Bill Hader in The Skeleton Twins. I chose Bill over Kristen Wiig because in some of Wiig's performances, I have seen her do a little bit more dramatic things. There was a scene in Bridesmaids that was more on the dramatic end specifically, but Bill Hader has always been nothing but just hilarious and goofy and with the characters and stuff, and I thought his role here was very meaty, very dramatic. Of course, we talked about that, so enough said there. My number 3 is Eddie Murphy in Dreamgirls. As many people know, I love this movie very much. It isn't any higher on my list because partially, just a little bit, his performance is reminiscent of a James Brown impression that he used to do on Saturday Night Live. So it's sort of a dramatic performance stemming from a comedic performance. But still, I mean, it's a powerhouse of a role that I don't think a lot of people had faith that Eddie Murphy could pull off. And my number 2 is Will Ferrell in Stranger Than Fiction. A great movie. It does have some comedic moments, but it is largely a drama. And he and Maggie Gyllenhaal, sparring back and forth at each other as the film progresses, is just great. He's got a great arc in the movie. And he's done a few different dramatic performances, but for me, this is the standout. Justin?
All right. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed Stranger Than Fiction as well, because that is also my number 5.
Oh, great.
Before this movie, I thought he was always this sort of over-the-top, quirky kind of actor, didn't have a whole lot of range. This completely shattered that perspective for me. I loved his existential character arc, and I thought it was so thought-provoking how it all comes together by the end of the film. Mm-hmm. My number 4 is Bill Murray in Cradle Will Rock. It's a very quirky but very serious performance as a 1930s theater company ventriloquist. While his moments training his protege, played by Jack Black, offer a few moments of comedy, and even though it's not really a front and center performance, it really does fit in with the complicated story of crisis of identity and trying to be true to your art form. My number 3, I'm hoping you'll forgive me for this, Dan. It's Bill Hader and Kristen Wiig, the Skeleton Twins. I chose to put them both on.
It's a bit of a cheat, but all right.
And to some extent I agree, but I thought they both did such a good job, I feel like equal credit is deserved. They play characters truly in their darkest of days, but do so in a way that really presents siblings in a brutally honest life. And they play off each other so well that the fact that they aren't siblings almost comes across as weird. And my number 2, probably, thank goodness for the fact that I'm not as fluent in SNL as you, Dan, is Eddie Murphy in Dreamgirls. Easily one of the best roles Murphy's ever played. It's a story of a rise and a fall in the film. I wasn't aware of his James Brown impersonation, but I can totally believe it.
Yeah, the James Thunder Early character basically is James Brown, so, yeah. I mean, it should come as no surprise, really.
Well, no, but I didn't know he had that act. Mm-hmm. But while I can't justify his sore loser-ish antics at the Academy Awards, I will happily say he was truly robbed.
All right, Joe, 5 through 2 on your list.
All right. Well, I guess I will start off with kind of an honorable mention here. Actually, it's kind of mostly comedic, but towards the end of the story, it actually gets very dramatic, and that would be Martin Short as Frick from Merlin. Was actually listed in filmography. He actually is a pretty cool side character in that. Very memorable. I actually enjoyed him in that movie.
Cool.
So
Love him.
Had to at least bring up a Merlin reference, My number 5 actually would be Hader from Skeleton Twins. I mean, just a really good performance. Kind of low on the list because I really never heard of him before. Mm-hmm. But still, I mean, I can't deny that he's probably given one of the best performances from, I guess, somebody with a huge comedic background.
Yeah.
Just his chemistry with Wiig seemed very genuine, that authentic, brother-sisterhood we talked about.
Definitely.
Don't need to go too much into that. Number 4, you guys might remember, it's Jay Moore as Brett Campbell from Suicide Kings. Mm-hmm. What a complete D-bag.
I love Jay Moore.
I mean, really, just Jay Moore is really good at just playing these mean, detestable characters, but in a really fairly serious role. You're just not supposed to like this guy. He's kind of the mastermind behind everything, and he gets his in the end. So, had to put him in there, definitely. Number 3 is actually Adam Sandler as John Klasky from Spanglish. Just playing kind of this tormented family man trying to hold everything together. His marriage is on the rocks. He's kind of got a semi-romantic relationship going on. Just plays a really down-to-earth guy. And I think it's probably the first performances I ever saw where he wasn't doing something really over-the-top and comedic and just really subtle, very restrained, very believable, just nice guy. Really liked his performance in this movie. It's a good one. I know you haven't seen it.
I figured that would be on your list, though, because I know you do love that movie.
It's a good movie,
Yeah.
and nobody talks about it anymore, but it is a good one. Number 2 is actually Will Ferrell, but it's not from Stranger Than Fiction. It's actually Nick Halsey from Everything Must Go.
Okay.
That is a good movie.
I've never seen it.
Really
Yeah, good choice.
I didn't. I remember like just seeing this movie and I'm thinking, well, this seems like a comedy. Seems like a screwball. No, like Will Ferrell plays a sad, depressed man struggling with alcoholism, literally losing everything, and just how he bonds with this kid and they kind of form this relationship. Really great story. Really kind of an undersold performance from him, but really great film and probably one of his best performances. I actually liked it more than Stranger Than Fiction.
He does drama very well.
He does. He has a lot of range, actually.
Yeah.
There's some comedy in some of these films, like for him, but it's kind of hard to completely excise that. But probably the most complicated character he's ever played, I think.
Yeah,
actually.
I don't doubt it. Well, my number 1 is Adam Sandler as well, but of course, as you know, I haven't seen Spanglish. It is from Reign Over Me. I don't know if it's my favorite of the performances on this list. That probably goes to Eddie Murphy, but Adam Sandler, like you said, I had never seen Spanglish, but up until Reign Over Me, I mean, it was all these, goofball roles and, being silly and fart jokes, and there is not 1 ounce of comedy in this role.
That's the Shadow Colossus movie, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. With Don Cheadle, 9/11. I mean, it blew me away. Maybe if I had seen Spanglish, I wouldn't have been as shocked. But man, this is just such a powerhouse performance from somebody who I certainly never thought had anything remotely like this in him.
Whenever he gives a dramatic performance, usually he gives a very good one. Honestly.
Justin, what's your number 1?
You ever see Punch Drunk Love?
I've never seen Punch Drunk Love either.
Another great one from him.
Yeah.
Thought about putting that one on the list.
Funny People's about the most dramatic I had seen.
To be fair, that is a more dramatic performance from him, which is pretty good, I'd argue.
But to get to my number 1, I'm sure you guys knowing me, Robert Downey Jr., Chaplin.
Yeah.
As I've told you both many times, the big thing that annoys me with Robert Downey Jr. now is I understand wanting to distance himself from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but at the same time, stop playing Tony Stark in every role.
Yeah.
And this movie really does serve as living proof that he has all this great range, and it doesn't have to be the Tony Stark show.
Well,
most of his early movies are.
To be fair, I did notice this. If you look back at his performance, Justin, he starts off with a lot of diversity. And he really has gotten himself rooted in the Tony Stark role, but he was heading that direction years before that.
Even when he was on Island of Beale, he was very sarcastic.
From the late 90s up is kind of where that range started to drop. Like, admittedly, Tony Stark is the pinnacle of that, but seriously, look at the 10 years before that. He starts playing kind of that same guy. So it's kind of what he's built up over time. Maybe that's why it's hard for him to get out of it. I'm not sure.
I can definitely believe that would be the case. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time with various actors in the biz. But he just plays the notorious silent film actor honestly to the T. And despite some other issues with the film in regards to historical accuracies and other things I won't get into, it's just really showing how much he honestly needs to return to these roles. Because I think he is a better actor than people are giving him credit for.
Oh, I think people know he's a good actor, just that, like you said, he's just kind of exclusively known as Iron Man now.
Yep.
Well, I think people are confusing likable with talented.
I mean, if you're good at playing a particular role and people like that, I guess that's not really a bad thing. A lot of actors kind of do the same thing and people go out to see it. It's not necessarily bad if you stick with what you're comfortable with. Some people do have less range.
That's true.
Doesn't
but
necessarily
I'm
make
not
them
entirely
bad
sure
actors.
if they're one and the same.
No.
But I apologize. I'm getting horribly
That's
off
probably
topic.
a conversation for another time.
Exactly.
Joe, what's your number 1?
This shouldn't be a surprise. It's probably the most obvious choice anyone could make, but it's Bill Murray as Bob Harris in Lost in Translation. I mean, this is probably one of the best movies ever made. Sorry. It's really fantastic drama. Really great. Him and Scarlett Johansson, just really great story. A lot going on. Very powerful, moving, and subtle at the same time. Honestly, it's definitely Bill Murray's favorite dramatic performance for me, and quite possibly his best performance ever. Not trying to oversell it, but it's a really good movie, and it's probably one of the most touching experiences I've had viewing it.
I feel like Bill Murray is certainly at this point almost a more dramatic actor than a comedic. I mean, he shows up every so often, Moonrise Kingdom, whatever. But a lot of his roles in the last, say, 15 years are pretty dramatic when it comes down to it.
Yeah, at least leaning that way.
Or at least leaning that way. Even in Groundhog Day, you see. I mean, yes, it's a comedy movie, but he definitely shows some dramatic range in that.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, good choice, certainly. All right, well, let's move into our triple feature of older movies. That's going to close out the show, and our new classic for this week was Seven Psychopaths, and Justin's going to have that.
Marty, played by Colin Farrell, has a great screenplay title, Seven Psychopaths, but can't seem to find the inspiration to bring it to life. Determined to keep him focused on the project, Marty's best friend, actor, and dog thief Billy, played by great person Sam Rockwell,
Yes, he is.
works with him by putting an ad out to meet some of the most twisted people available to help Marty finish his project. When I figured out that this would be Dan's latest entry into the Film Fanatics new classic docket, I gave an overenthusiastic yes. As much as I do love this film, and I do, I was mostly thinking in regards to when I put this on my top 10 movies that reflect my life list in the pilot, and how my reasons are every bit as relevant now as they were way back when. Marty surrounds himself and encounters the strangest and liveliest of characters, all of whom could be a story in and of themselves. Particularly Tom Waits is a bunny-carrying killer who hunted various killers from the past. Is it as bizarre and original as McDonagh's prior film In Bruges, or his brother's powerful film from this year, Calvary? No, but that's not to say that it doesn't have anything interesting to offer. Thanks to the great casting, there are some remarkably funny moments, and Rockwell absolutely steals the show at every turn, giving the most hilariously over-the-top monologue of the past few years, which could act as a strong commentary on the mainstream concept of endings. It's not always consistent with its humor, but Seven Psychopaths is an entertaining dark comedy with a vicious take on storytelling, and I give it a B+.
Joe, what do you think of Seven Psychopaths?
Well, this movie is full of a lot of craziness and fun. I think that it was really a great experience because it's another one of those movies that I was interested in, but I did miss back in the day. And I'm actually really glad I finally got to see it. It's got a lot of my favorite actors playing a lot of really kooky, interesting characters, and it's got a little bit of everything. I mean, it's kind of a big commentary on the whole struggle about screenplay development and just writing in general, the interplay between fact and fiction, how much real life can essentially blend into that, and how everybody could have some really complicated relationships, not to mention just some really fun, kooky action. Mm-hmm. Really, for the most part, the humor does work. It's really over the place, but you've got a lot of great people with some great chemistry. Probably one of the most interesting trios I've ever seen between Walken, Rockwell, and Ferrell. I mean, just everybody gives great performances. Harrelson's a really fun villain. Really, the only thing I kind of wish is that they had sort of integrated some of the other characters perhaps a little better into it. Like some of the psychopaths were strictly fictional, whereas some actually were real. And like my favorite psychopath was actually the Vietnamese character.
Right.
Really interesting story. Could have had a whole movie about this guy. I honestly wish he'd been real, or at least maybe had a little more time. I kind of wish all the psychopaths had a little more balance there. I felt like it kind of shifted one particular way. But for the most part, though, I found it really enjoyable. For the most part, it was pretty well told. I mean, it had a few clunky moments here or there, but overall, though, it was really enjoyable. I could see maybe a prequel or a sequel. I would love to revisit these characters in some way, shape, or form, and I actually give it an A-.
Very nice. Well, there is a fine line between satirical comedy and going overboard simply for shock value. Seven Psychopaths finds that balance and straddles it the entire film. It may be too misogynistic or homophobic for some, but those people would be missing the point of the film. The characters spouting off these lines are straight-up morons, and a great comedy ensemble allows its actors to play flawlessly off each other, and Psychopaths has that ensemble, not to mention one of Sam Rockwell's greatest performances. It may not be the straight-up funniest film of the last couple years, but it's easily one of the most well-written and well-executed, and I also give it an A-, Joe. I do find that certain characters could have been fleshed out a little bit more. Even the Tom Waits Bunny character.
Him too.
We see him, briefly, and then he pops up again at the very end of the movie.
Like, I want more.
But really, we only see... Woody Harrelson,
all right,
great performance from him, of course, and he's a great psychopath.
Great psychopath, kind of crucial to the plot. Could have probably learned more about him, too.
Mm-hmm.
Really, that's the biggest problem, is, there was a little more of a shift to the main three, which is fine, but the movie's called Seven Psychopaths. We want to get a little more balance with the seven.
Right.
That's definitely a factor there as well. Actually, there was one thing that bugged me. There was a certain point where we see something happen to somebody that Christopher Walken's character cares about in the movie. Feels like it comes out of nowhere and it lacks some punch. Mm-hmm. And I think that might have been a tonal shift. That's obviously not supposed to be too comedic.
Right.
And I would be fine with some drama. It's obviously a big motivation for that character. But we don't really know her character very much.
Right.
So that part kind of bugged me a little bit.
That could have been handled better.
And that could have been a more interplay between those two, him and Harrelson, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So there were some elements that could have been fleshed out or explored a little easier. But on the whole, though, it was a lot of fun.
Your favorite was that businessman, though.
I liked the Vietnamese priest guy with
prisoner of war,
former Viet Cong guy.
Fake priest. I don't know what exactly his deal was.
I understand his point, and I how he's kind of he functions well for what he is, but I really like that. I wish that it had been part of the story somehow. It didn't necessarily have to be fiction.
Right.
Maybe there could, because the whole movie's about balancing fiction with reality and how everything's kind of based on craziness, feeds off each other. They could have easily had some source of it that was real. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with it. Obviously, everything Tom Waits is saying may or may not be true, could be exaggerated. So why not exaggerate something on the truth? I just wish we had gotten a little more of that altogether.
All right. Well, up next is our old classic, and it is horror month. So Joe is going to tell us about Candyman.
Oh, yes. Candyman is a 1992 horror film directed by Bernard Rose, with the story and production by Clive Barker. The film stars Virginia Madsen and Tony Todd. Madsen plays Helen Lyle, a graduate student who is working on her thesis on urban legends. Her focus is on Chicago's Cabrini Green housing projects. There she researches the legend of the Candyman, played by Todd, an artist and son of a slave who was horribly murdered a century or so before. This leads her to uncover some brutal gangland violence and the eventual discovery of the Candyman himself. She falls into this curse of revenge, as he murders several people and steals a child, all while framing her for it and causing her to seriously question her own sanity. This movie has all the trappings of a Barker horror flick. It has some good performances, some great special effects, camera work, and an awesome soundtrack and sound design, particularly on Todd's awesome voice. I really like the hook, so to speak, for the film. For the time, the movie actually offered some interesting commentary and brutal realism to the harshness of inner-city life, with lots of possible subtext on a cultural level. It's too bad the movie's awesome thematic points are often derailed by plot holes and questionable character decisions, leading into some borderline cliché horror territory. However, it never quite reaches it, thankfully, due to the disturbing nature of the story and some good performances, most notably from Todd, who is perhaps one of the creepiest and most intimidating supernatural threats in horror. Overall, Candyman is not as scary or mind-blowing as when I originally viewed it, but it offers some interesting ideas and imagery, a few genuine scares, and an overall good time. I give it a B-. Or rather, a B-.
That's true. This is actually my second time through for this one. I couldn't believe it, but of all the classic 80s and 90s horror films that I have passed over, somehow I saw this one before, and it was great to see it again. It's campy for sure, but it is a classic kind of for its campiness in a way. It's pretty ridiculous, not that well acted except from Todd, and without particularly strong effects. But the story is great and does offer some genuine scares here. And it does offer some interesting social commentary. I'm not sure that we can expect any more than that from a horror film from this era. I mean, Madsen is good as well, but Todd certainly steals the show, and he is very, very scary. You know, everybody else of the supporting cast, they could use some acting lessons.
Sandra Berkeley.
But yes, that's true. But, again, that's sort of a staple of this era of horror films. One or two good name actors to headline, and the supporting cast could be literally anybody. Yeah. But in all, Candyman is scary good fun. I actually give it a B+.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Justin?
After my first viewing of Candyman, I understood the hype, but thought it was more than a little overrated. But it's interesting what a second viewing can do, especially on this show. While I still stand on my opinion that the film is overrated, I definitely have an appreciation for source author Barker finding new concepts to make his stories all the more terrifying. In this film, that venue is in the underprivileged ghettos, and most importantly, folklore. These components, I confess, I overlooked during my first viewing when I was 16, but now after writing several papers on narrative as well as myth, I can appreciate this significantly more. Unfortunately, that still leaves the protagonist, which is the main focus of why I consider Candyman overrated. After years, if not well over a decade, of watching innumerous horror films, I understand the cliche of the survivors making poor, if not completely moronic decisions, but Madsen takes us to an entirely new level. What begins as this grounded yet grotesque and eerie story with a great score quickly descends into ridiculousness, with Madsen portraying a supposedly intelligent, street-savvy grad student making every questionable decision one could imagine. She touches evidence that would prove her innocence. She walks into dark, secluded buildings alone, and yet the film expects the audience to be terrified at the idea that all this backfires hideously on her. It doesn't quite ruin the film, but it does make what's frequently considered a horror classic fall into good, not great territory, and I'm actually between you two. I give it a B.
This might be the first old classic that we've had where the person that brought it actually gives it the lowest grade.
Interesting.
I don't know if we've had that before. The Virginia Madsen logic problems, I guess you could say. I thought
that's the nature of the beast.
It is the nature of the beast. And I can get behind that she picks up certain evidence because you know what? She was knocked out. She wakes up. She doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know if there's a killer still in the house.
To be fair.
So she picks something up. I don't know. It happens.
The way I look at it is this. You've got a situation like this. Any normal person is not going to be thinking super rationally.
Right.
Because what's happening is not really rational. So for you to make some mistakes, it's understandable.
I'm just going to say Prometheus and we'll leave it at that.
Yes, exactly. the best example of dumb character decisions in horror movies.
I do agree that it is pretty stupid for her to go off gallivanting on her own. But she originally brings her one friend in the first thing that she goes to, and that goes horribly wrong. Mm-hmm. So maybe she's just trying to be a good friend and not put any of her other buddies in harm's way. This is her assignment, her project, whatever. Maybe it's not the best excuse, but as far as horror logic goes, it's not the worst that I've seen.
No, it's definitely not the worst.
There are far dumber characters in horror movies.
And there are, but when she's supposedly this intelligent supposed to be portrayed as this intelligent street savvy character, the fact that she's making these kind of inane decisions.
I will be honest. I think that she might be intelligent. I don't know if she's necessarily street smart though. Well, she might think she is.
You would figure that since she's focusing on all this land-based research.
Green,
yeah. I remember in the short story it was graffiti, but I'm not sure if that differed.
It took place in England, and I think it was actually in the country as opposed to an urban setting, so that's why there's a bit of a translation difference there.
Yeah, but point being, you would figure that because of that, she would have at least had some idea of the setting she was in, but I'm getting off topic, I apologize.
The way I took it was that she kind of had a little more confidence than she expected, and plus, to be fair, as I'm sure you would know, just because you're in grad school doesn't necessarily mean you're intelligent.
Well, and also,
you know what I'm saying?
I mean, I know a lot of very intelligent people that have no common sense or street smart whatsoever.
That's what I'm saying.
So I can't really fault her too much for that.
And as we can see later on in the film, due to, as I will call him, exposition Benjamin Franklin, she wasn't quite as well informed as she thought she was about everything in the area.
That's true, too. He definitely schooled her on certain things.
He schooled her on the plot.
Basically. But no, this was a very fun one, Joe. I really enjoyed the rewatch. It had been a long time, certainly, since I had seen it.
That's good.
Yeah. All right, our final film is our Oscar A to Z, and this week we are up to Angels with Dirty Faces. It is a 1938 film nominated for 3 Oscars, all of them in major categories. Best Actor for James Cagney, Best Director for Michael Curtiz, and Best Original Story. Childhood friends Rocky Sullivan, played by Cagney, and Jerry Connolly, played by Pat O'Brien, used to get into lots of trouble. As adults, though, Jerry has changed his ways and become a priest, while Rocky stayed on the wrong path and has become a notorious gangster. When Rocky comes around to the old neighborhood and tries to hang out with some of the boys in Jerry's parish, he fears Rocky will influence them into a life of crime. In the meantime, Rocky involves himself with a crooked lawyer, played by Humphrey Bogart, and shady businessman Kiefer, played by George Bancroft, and bites off more than he can chew, getting Jerry involved in their illegal dealings and essentially putting a target on both of their heads. Angels with Dirty Faces is considered one of the classic gangster films of all time, and it's easy to see why. The performances from the leads are outstanding, and Cagney's rapid-fire delivery is a stark and welcome change of pace from a lot of his contemporaries' slower drawls, including Bogart himself. Cagney and O'Brien made 9 films together in all, and as friends off-screen as well, they are very believable as lifelong pals. Director Curtiz was on the rise and showing some great early promise here, leading up to AAA+ from us on the show, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and a few years later, Casablanca. One of my complaints with the film, though, is that Ann Sheridan, who plays Laurie Martin, a girl pal of Rocky's from way back, is given really nothing to do with a character that could have been expanded upon to get a slightly more sympathetic side of Rocky.
Honestly, that's probably like one of the most forward-written characters ever. Like she seemed like she was in a movie 40 years ahead.
I know.
Just her delivery, her dialogue seems totally different than the really over-the-top nature.
Than what else is happening.
Like,
in the
you really
movie.
could see her like talking like in a film that would be made now. Mm-hmm. It's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. But this definitely earns its place as a gangster classic, and I give it an A. Joe? Our gangster expert here.
Really, I agree. I think this is one of Cagney's best performances. I don't know if it's like his best gangster movie. I think that there are some other ones that are slightly better. I wish that it actually was a little more focused on the gangster lifestyle. But in terms of just showing the basic dichotomy between these two guys going on different paths, but still struggling to maintain their relationship and kind of have some element of redemption, it's a really good story. Plus, there's some really great set design and camera work here. Mm-hmm. Very ahead of its time.
Yeah, the sets are great.
Really crisp direction. It's hard to believe it was made in the 30s. My only real negative of the film is that even though I liked the kid characters, I understood their purpose, I felt there was a little too much time devoted to them. I thought that I understood it, but I thought it kind of took away from some of the more dramatic components of the characters that this film is actually about. Mm-hmm. But really, the performances are great. The characters are well written. It's got a fairly complex story, a lot of good tension, and a really good climax. And honestly, pretty dark and violent. Pretty bold for the time, as the Cagney gangster flicks are. And I actually am right up there with you. I give it an A. It's just nice. A very well written film. Not my favorite of them, but still really well deserved.
Justin?
Angels with Dirty Faces makes audiences wonder just how much of our life comes down to luck and circumstance, all while posing a question of how far one will be willing to go for a friend. Although it's a crime story regarding Cagney's character descending into the corrupt world of crime because of his actions, they never deny that if things played out only slightly differently, Cagney and O'Brien would be playing very different roles. The narrative unfolds at a smooth rate, with strong narrative devices being used to keep the deceptive feel suspenseful and lively. Unfortunately, Angels with Dirty Faces' greatest setback is arguably the component that kept it alive for the decades to follow. The dead-end kids.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Although they played a role in this and became regulars for many films to follow afterwards, these characters largely get in the way and just don't have the same believability as Cagney and O'Brien. Granted, there is a slight moment of payoff for them by the end, but ultimately, Angels with Dirty Faces would be better off without them, causing what should have been an A and descends into an A-.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I loved them, and I'm sure I don't know if I want to see their own movies, but I thought as a plot device here, maybe there was a little too much time devoted to them, but I didn't see it as a huge negative. I mean, I saw their purpose, and obviously that's they're the main reason for O'Brien to get involved, with trying to set things right.
Yes.
No, I mean, they have a place, but I feel like
they don't quite jive.
Just a basic cameo would have done the job.
Maybe not a cameo. I do think that we probably could have cut back a couple scenes with them. I do agree they do take me out of the movie. That's why I probably didn't give it an A+, honestly. Because they they really do take you out of the movie a little bit because they tonally do seem to be a little different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they could have cut back a couple scenes. Didn't bother me quite as much, but I do agree they're a little annoying.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen, Justin, one of their actual movies?
I have not seen any of the other Dead End Kid movies.
I have no interest in seeing that.
I know there's quite a few of them that they made, but are either of you familiar with what's known as the Hays Code? It's what they had before the MPAA. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So basically, a few years before this movie was made, is when they actually started regulating movies. And because of that, the violence in this was actually toned down a little bit from some of the early 30s movies, which, I mean, none of which I've seen, but apparently, a lot of gangster movies and the, violence and gore and stuff is
pretty intense.
Basically the reason that they started making, certain guidelines for movies.
Well, yeah, like Scarface. Yeah, like, like literally, this is actually probably the tamest. Mm-hmm. They're literally like,
and I don't doubt that because it was post code here.
I mean, really, it's just that's kind of one reason why they're considered so groundbreaking is because in terms of like thematically, in terms of violence and gritty commentary on urban life, crime life, it's pretty intense. I mean, like that's why the next couple decades afterwards, everything seems so hunky dory,
right, singing in the rain,
because they're literally able to get away with people straight up murdering each other,
right.
It's but literally, if you think this is about Scarface, it's like people shooting each other, shootouts constantly.
So I'd be curious to sort of compare the two. I mean, I don't think it detracted from this movie at all, because I think maybe it does give us a chance to focus a little more on the story than the violence. But I just thought that was interesting that this was one of the first gangster movies to come out after that code was established.
You could tell, though, because, and even by those standards...
it's a little watered down.
Especially by the end, though, it's pretty,
Oh, yeah. It's still pretty intense, I would say. All right, well, that is going to do it for the show this week. We close out Horror Month next week with a bang. We've got 3 brand new horror releases for you. Annabelle, The Book of Life, and Dracula Untold, of which Joe has... Have you made a video yet for the Merlin channel?
Yes, I have. Okay.
Joe has a video of him and his buddies talking about Dracula Untold already, so if you want a little sneak preview of his thoughts on the movie, you can go to the Merlin channel and check that out. Mm-hmm. And we'll also have a Halloween-themed new classic, an old classic, and home media moment as well. So if you're into the horror stuff, definitely check that out. And Joe, what else is new on the Merlin channel?
Well, they'll be doing a live stream.
Nice.
But you guys will be happy to know that a couple commenters were asking if the other Film Fanatics will be there. Just to let you know.
Cool.
You guys got some supporters over there.
That's awesome. We definitely appreciate that. And speaking of supporting the show, if you have not subscribed yet to our YouTube channel, definitely go ahead and do that. And if you haven't subscribed to Joe's yet, do that too and check out all the great videos there. You can check us out on Facebook as well. We post our 5-word reviews there weekly, leading up to that week's show, and that's Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. And our Twitter feed is at Film Fanatics Pod. That's going to do it for the show this week. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Hail Hydra.